Hey crafters, today we're going to be making some scatter terrain rock formations. We're going to be making a bunch of them. I'm going to be using a 2 foot by 2 foot square of 1 inch foam. So this is going to be as many as you want or as few as you want. I'm making these to look like northern Wisconsin rock structures. There's a type of limestone that was carved out by the glaciers. I'll put a couple reference photos to start out before we start crafting so you can see what I'm talking about and why this is a little different than your typical up and down or slightly angled cuts, and why we're going to be dealing more in golden browns and greens than we will with grays and blacks. So let's hit the table. So what you see here are the limestone and sandstone hills that are carved out by the rivers and the glaciers here in Wisconsin that we're going to try and model today. So just so you can see the greens and browns. Let's hit the table. So you've seen the type of rocks we're trying to emulate here. Now we took some foam and we cut some shapes. We want irregular shapes, lots of rounding, some nice in juts. I took a 2 foot by 2 foot piece of 1 inch foam and I cut these. Literally, this is maybe a third of the pieces I've cut. I've got a larger work table behind me and that's covered in pieces. So I'm just going to have a couple here that I work with at a time so I don't get overwhelmed on my main workspace. I've also taken some regular 1/2 inch foam and I've cut a number of these, so some of them will be some mini stackers inside and some will be some pieces on top. I like variations in height, I like variations in size, and I like steps. This is a to-taste thing, so cut your pieces. You can use a cutter if you've got one, a handheld or a table cutter or a knife, that'll all work. But you just cut your pieces so that you've got a number of the hills equal to what you want. And then again, we're taking pieces and you're just kind of marrying them up till you get the shapes you're looking for. Now you'll notice this is beveled. We're going to come back and I'm going to show you what we're doing there. Okay crafters, so we've got our freshly cut pieces. And you notice that there's nothing to them, nothing special. They're just the shapes we cut out. But we're going to bevel the tops just a little bit. So we take our cutter and we're just taking a little bit of an edge and again, this is to taste, so this is you being creative. So, we've got our piece. Now, we're going to take a sanding sponge or some type of, soft sanding, like you take a sponge and just take a piece of sandpaper and put on there. And we just want to Alright, so now we've got a gentle bevel at the top. We got our divots in. So now we're going to take the blade, lock it in place, and you're going to be careful here because it's easy to cut your finger, but you're going to want to run some lines. Okay, so now we've got it all lined up. And now here's the messy part. We're going to take a wire brush, and you can get these 3 for $1 at Dollar Tree. You get the metal ones. And we're going to go all the way around. And then what you'll find is you get a really great rock texture out of that. So take this and go all the way around and then go up and down. So all right, And look at that. That is a great, great high detail texture. This is going to look great once we get it all painted up. It looks good now, so when it's painted. And don't be gentle. Go ahead and just get in there and muscle it up. You're going to probably ruin one or two of these brushes doing this for a whole board worth. But you don't care. I mean, it's going to look great, and it's going to get those edges roughed up and highlight those lines and really make some variation in there for the painting. So you're going to take, this is messy. I'm going to warn you now, this is super messy. So go through and do this to all your pieces and get them all prepped up. And then we'll get back to stacking and shaping. Okay, so we've got our pieces and we're ready to put them together. Now, one of the things I found is when you're working with the smaller foam here, you actually don't need to actually bevel the top. You can just run a sanding sponge around those corners and it'll smooth it out just enough. Also remember, when you've done a piece, you want to make sure you take the brush and give it a couple firm strokes on both the top and bottom to kind of break up the shininess of the foam that's there. That'll let it adhere better, it'll let it stick with the glue and the PVA you put on top for the grit and everything else. It just makes the surface better for bonding. So now we're going to get to bond. You could use PVA glue if you wanted to put them together. I just find that it doesn't dry. It takes forever to dry if it does. Foam Factory makes a styro goo. That's pretty good if you can get that. Gorilla Glue also makes a styrofoam glue. They call it their polyurethane glue. I find using a hot glue gun is fine. Just remember that if you want to use a multi-temp and you want to use low temperature. High temperature could melt the foam and kind of ruin what you're working on. But if you just take a low temp setting and just run a simple bead around the outside of the piece, and you see, there you go. It's already nice and stable. As it cools, it'll even get better. Now we're going to talk about basing. You can use cardstock, you could use chipboard, you can use some very thin MDF if you have it. I happen to get some EPVA card. You can get this online. It's basically this stuff, but just super compressed without the foamy stuff. It's plastic. Takes glue pretty good, takes paint pretty good, but you can cut it with a safety knife. You can get it at sign makers. You can get it at photo studios. They use it to back like homemade framing. You can get it at framing places, so you can get it there. There's a lot of places you can get it. It's pretty simple. It doesn't warp. That's why I like this stuff. Then glue or paint won't make it warp. So we're just going to kind of fit this the way we want and take a marker. And then you can just take a regular hobby knife and cut these pieces off and then gently bevel the edges. The surface a little. And that's just to give it something a little rough so it'll be easier for it to glue on. So we're going to trim and bevel. Alright, so now we've got our piece, and again it's the same drill. So now our glue is set, our piece is based, and now we're going to work on gridding it up. So there's two steps to this. First off, we're going to add some gravelly bits. And this is just, I took some construction sand and and I sifted out some of the larger particulate matter. And for these we're using just to dress up places. So we're going to just put a little bit of hot glue here and there where we specifically want. So we've got some spots where we've got a buildup of rocks and material. Now we just want to grit. We want to apply our glue on all the flat surfaces, but don't get any glue into the roughed up areas. I use black Mod Podge. It's also a good way to be able to tell where stuff is at. And then once you have it, I'm dry. The nice thing about doing a lot of these is you can assembly line them. While the one we were working on is drying, I've got this piece that I did earlier that's already dry and ready for priming. So again, we're taking our black Mod Podge and we're just using a large brush and we're stippling it over everything, including the sand we put down. We're just going to stipple the whole thing, and basically equivalent of black bombing, but we can't use spray paint because we don't want to melt our foam. So stipple this, come back. So after the black bomb dries, you're going to want to apply a coat of a dark brown. Now you can do this with an airbrush, you can do this with a regular brush. I had troubles with my airbrush and I'm still learning the ropes with it, so I ended up grabbing a can of foam safe, or at least foam friendly-ish spray paint, and gave it a light dusting all the way around, giving it a nice deep brown color. So we've brought in our little assistant Kender to give us a hand today, and she has taken Golden Brown by Craftsmart. That's the color we're going to use. And she's put it on our wet palette. And she's now going to give this a deep brushing. She's going to follow the work areas of the cuts and give it about a 90 to 95% coverage. And there we go. That's pretty nicely done. So we're going to let this dry, and then we're going to come back for our next coat. Okay, so our golden brown has dried, and even if it's a little tacky, that's okay at this point because we're wanting some blending here. What we're doing now is we're going to put in some streaks into the upright areas of the stone to make it blend and show color variations in the rock. So we've got two colors. We already started with golden brown. Now we're going to use a Craftsmart tan, and we're just doing streaks. And these streaks we're going overall about a 20% coverage. But basically they're supposed to look like streaks in the stone itself. Now we're going to do the same thing with our green. Now, we don't need to clean the brush between this because it's okay if we get some blend of these colors. So we're just doing the same thing with an olive green. And once you've got your streaks in place, this is also not a bad time to take some of that mixed paint on your brush and just kind of gently drag it across the piles of rocks you have. You don't want to really completely color them, but you want to put some variation in their coloring. So you're not going deep, you're not pushing hard on them, you're just changing some of the configuration of them. And now let it dry completely. We need to have all this paint completely dry before we do our wash. So we've got one of our finished pieces here, nice and dry. The streaks are all dry, and now we're going to wash it. Now there's a couple different ways you can do washes. I make my own. It's 1 part fine artist ink, 2 parts matte medium, and then 8 parts water with just a dash of a surfactant. I use a little bit of dish soap. A couple different ways you can do it. That's mine. I got it from another person on the internet here, so find your own that you like, find one that works for you. Maybe later on we'll do a video about washes. Right now we're going to take this wash that I got, and it's a golden brown looking wash. I just use brown ink, no black. And we're just going to give the entire thing a heavy coat. We're more interested about getting it into the rock faces and into the rock piles. We don't need to cover the base itself so much because it's going to be covered in flocking. Now, you'll notice that we're not really worrying again about the top surfaces. That's going to drain through, and a lot of it's going to be covered in flock. Also, you want to make sure you let these dry upright, and if they streak down, that's okay. That's going to just add the natural variation in the rock colors, and that's what we're trying. So, go through it, all the ones you've made, and wash away. Okay, grafters, so we've got our piece, and the washing has dried, and now we're going to do a heavy dry brushing. So we've gotten our sun-kissed peach, we've got most of it off the brush, and we're going to give a heavy dry brushing. Fully dry brushed, this is what we end up with. It's a lovely color, and once we get the green of the flocking on here, this is all really just going to pop even brighter. So that's next. We're going to grab some flocking and dress this up. Okay, so we've got a piece here ready for flocking. Now, in this case, because we're doing layered flocking, we're doing it a couple different sizes of pieces. We're doing some small clump foliage, we're doing some coarse turf, and we're doing some fine turf to get a mix of textures and colors. You kind of have to sprinkle them in layers. So, first thing you gotta do is just get yourself your glue. I prefer using 100% undiluted Mod Podge, and cover all the surfaces you're going to glue up. Okay, now that we have it all glued covered, I'm going to take it and put it in a container to catch the excess flock. Now normally, if I were just doing one piece, I would do each layer of flock and then sift them back out. But because I have a large number that I'm doing, we're going to do it in layers and just let all the stuff collect together. And the last few of the set I'm going to do, I don't even need to do it in layers. When you're doing layered flock, you want to do it in reverse order of density. So the first pieces you put on are your biggest pieces. Now we go to the second layer, which in this case is our coarse turf. And then lastly, we're just going to hand sprinkle on some fine turf. Alright, that looks pretty great. Lastly, we're going to shake off a little bit of our excess. And we're going to take a couple pieces of our large flocking. Cover a piece of it with glue and just put it down on the model where we think our little bush or shrub will look good. Alright, just let it dry. Once it's dry, we're going to give it an application of our sealing glue, and we'll talk about that when this is dry and we come back. Well, crafters, we're at the last part of our project. As you can see, the flock's done and it looks great. Now we're just going to lock the whole thing down. Now here we're going to be using a model railroading trick. First thing we're going to do is we're going to just take some regular isopropyl alcohol. And this is 70%, so it's the really cheap stuff. But we're just using it to gently coat the project. And this is just to get everything a little wet and it'll make it easier for the glue to soak in. Then we're going to take what I call a flock glue. It's a flocking glue or a surface glue or a sealant, however you want to call it. It's 4-to-1 ratio of Mod Podge to water. We've got it in a spray bottle, and we're going to give the whole project kind of a liberal spray down. That's it. Once it dries, we're going to come back and take a look at our pieces. So I've thrown a couple minis in there to give you some scale. But here's a complete set of those hills. We did one 2-foot by 2-foot section of board and ended up with 10 nice size hills. This is a complete set to cover a board. We got some nice blocking terrain, some extra terrain, and something to really make this table pop. So, thanks for being with us, and thanks for sticking through and watching this tutorial, and we'll see you next time. Game on!